It's exactly 3 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee to order for February 6, 2024. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Barrett, Boyd, Camper, Cochran, Crawford, Faison, Freeman, Gant, Garrett, Hawk, Hicks of Hawkins, Hicks of Washington, Kiesling, Lamberth, Love, Lynn, McKenzie, Miller, Moon, Parkinson, Shaw, Sparks, Whitson, Williams, Zachary, Vice Chairman Baum, Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any personal orders or announcements? Seeing none, I do have one. There's been some consternation among committee members in the attempt to be efficient with our time. Our crack staff put nameplates where you were sitting the last time that we were in this room. It is not to mean that you are assigned that seat. If you don't like the seat or your neighbor, feel free to bargain, make any changes that you'd like. It was not deemed as any sort of punishment or reward. It was simply based on where you were last time. With that, today we were going to hear the budget overview presented by Commissioner of Finance Administration and his staff. Members, you have documents in front of you. I think they're also will be on on our screens that you can access that from dashboard. And without any other questions or personal orders, we will go out of session and we will ask the commissioner and his team to come forward. Commissioner, it seems that we've been seeing a lot of you lately, but welcome back one more time. And just for the record, if you would identify yourself and your staff members, and then you all know you've been around this block several times, but when you speak, just please identify yourself for the record for those who might not be able to have visual access. So, Commissioner Bryson, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. It's good to be here. Thank you, members of the committee. I will report, first of all, that I'm very happy with the seat that I'm in and my neighbors that I'm sitting with. So I'm Jim Bryson. This is Budget Director David Thurman and Associate Director Alex Schuman. And we're very pleased to be here and with you and look forward to presenting a budget overview for you today. Thank you for all the work that you have done on the budget, and we're looking forward to the partnership that we will have over the next few months. So before I get started, I really do want to thank you and the entire General Assembly for your dedication to consistently conservative and careful budgeting for Tennessee. We all know that economies are cyclical and they rise and they fall. During the good times, Tennessee has been faithful to put funds aside and pay off debt, knowing that those good times don't always last. This Tennessee conservatism is paying off as we build the FY25 budget. Before we get started today with our current budget overview, I would like to take a moment to revisit the extraordinary growth and accomplishments of the past 3 years. We have made unprecedented investments in our state and in our people. At the same time, we have wisely put money aside with the knowledge that the high growth years could not and would not last. This is a chart that shows the last 5 or 6 years of growth. And as you can see, over the last 3 years, we've experienced a very robust economy and historic tax revenue growth. In fact, our tax revenue has grown by 46% since FY 2020. This funding growth has allowed us to make significant investments that move our state forward. I'd like to highlight just a few of those investments here. First, education funding. Public education has always been a priority. Our recurring public education funding formulas have grown by nearly $2 billion since FY 2020. This budget alone proposes $6.8 billion for public education for the FY 25 school year. This is the most money ever invested in our public schools in a single year. We have also invested a record amount of state and federal funds into infrastructure and capital these past 3 years. In all, nearly $7.5 billion in capital projects are currently underway in every corner of the state for all kinds of uses: higher education, state park, water, wastewater, broadband, And last year we put $1 billion into our TCAT system to develop a better workforce. In addition to the $7.5 billion in capital, we have made a historic $3.3 billion general fund investment in our state and local roads. These critical infrastructure investments will serve our citizens for decades to come. These are wise investments that will last a very long time for Tennesseans. We have also not neglected our reserves. All of our reserves have grown. For example, since FY 2020, our rainy day fund has grown over 40%, or about $800 million. We are now at 9.4% of our tax revenue, which is well above the statutory goal of 8%. Our rainy day fund is in good shape. In addition to these examples, we've invested heavily in law enforcement, health, behavioral health, school security, children's services, agriculture, and many, many other areas. We've always been mindful that we lived in unusual times. We were acutely aware that extraordinary revenue growth was unprecedented and could not last. That is why I want to show you this slide. It is important for this year's budget that we understand what the impact of this. Many states experienced record growth in revenues. However, unlike some other states, Tennessee did not spend all of our growth on recurring government programs. We built our reserves, reduced our debt, we made wise investments in our infrastructure and our future. Most notably, we put increasing amounts of our recurring dollars to non-recurring uses. In FY24, we allocated over $2.6 billion of recurring revenue to non-recurring expenses. That $2.6 billion is now available for the FY25 budget as recurring revenue without recurring expenses. For these and other reasons, we are well prepared for this year of low growth. And as you can see from this chart, which is very similar to the one I just showed you a minute ago, except that we have added the FY24 and FY25 expected tax revenues, that we see here that tax revenues have flattened, federal funds are dwindling, and we are facing significant financial challenges. However, because of sound financial management, we are prepared and ready to weather these changes without unanticipated reductions to the base budget or to any of our reserves. As we consider the FY25 budget, it is important to remember that our tax revenues have grown 45%, as I stated a moment ago. Even though we have enacted several tax cuts during that period, Tennessee remains strong, and we do not anticipate losing any of the tax revenue ground that we have gained. So where are we now? In November, the Funding Board met and issued revised growth estimates for FY24 and FY25. The Funding Board revised the FY24 estimate, which is the year that we are in right now, down from 2.25% growth to 0% growth. This downward revision in tax revenue created a $718 million budget hole that we had to plug with part of the $2.6 billion I mentioned earlier. The Funding Board also revised its forecast, but estimates a slight improvement for FY25, 2.5% growth. As you see on this slide, this estimate will result in about $95 million of new recurring revenue for tax year FY25, which is the one that we are budgeting for today. We have one other challenge that I would like to talk to you about before we move into some of the expenditures for this budget. This budget funds a bill to simplify the franchise tax in Tennessee. Currently, the franchise tax is based on the hire of a company's net worth or property owned in the state. The proposed bill would eliminate the property measure, so the tax is much simpler. It would simply be assessed on the company's net worth only. This will simplify the tax for filers, but will reduce our revenues annually by about $410 million. This revenue reduction will be recognized as a recurring expense for the FY25 budget. The same bill authorizes refunds for companies that paid the franchise tax based on the property measure. By statute, companies may request tax refunds for up to 4 previous tax years. Therefore, we estimate total refund requests to be approximately $1.2 billion. In the spirit of returning these funds to taxpayers promptly and putting this expenditure behind us, we have elected to recognize all of these refunds this year by establishing a franchise tax refund account in the FY24 supplemental budget. This extraordinary expense is a major budget item. We were able to accomplish this objective even in a low growth year because of the wise planning and spending constraint by the General Assembly and this administration over the past several years. We have the ability to do this now, put this issue behind us, and set the stage for a strong year in FY26. So let's talk for a few minutes about some of the things that we want to do in the budget. As I go into that, I want to reiterate that we are in a good financial position and we are well prepared for the year ahead. We do not need wholesale budget cuts, nor do we need to raid our reserves. In fact, this budget continues to make key investments in Tennessee, just at a lower level than the previous 3 years. As always, we will continue to be careful and conservative with our budget. Here's just a quick pie chart of basic summaries of where the money is going. As you can see, about a quarter of the new dollars will be allocated to education and about 16% to TennCare. There are also significant expenditures for environment and conservation, capital, and notably, state employees, where we are making a $158 million investment in pay and benefits. So let's look at some of these expenditures in a little more detail. The first page here is ongoing initiatives and commitments. This is the category the budget team often refers to as have-tos. This is where these are areas that we have often committed to in previous budgets or feel like that we really have to do. As you can see here, about 7 of these items are actually in the middle of multi-year pilots, so we want to continue to do those. And then there are several other items here, some of which we will talk about later, and others we'll be glad to take questions on if you have some related to that. The bottom one is the biggest item, which is a capital outlay for some DCS facilities, which we have budgeted for in the past, but which we need to add some additional funding to complete. So those are ongoing initiatives or have-tos. Let's start with the budget's single largest investment, which is education. Here are the key items in the education budget expansion. First, the TISA funding formula for our public schools grows by $261 million, bringing our total investment in public schools to nearly $6.8 billion in this year. This is almost $2 billion more than the funding in 2020. Included in this amount is funding to increase teacher pay, keeping us on track to bring starting teacher pay in Tennessee to $50,000 by FY27. So we are on track with that initiative. Second, we increase the investment in the summer learning program to ensure that Tennessee children meet educational standards and have the best opportunity for long-term success. Third, the budget includes funding to assist school districts to provide facilities for charter schools. And finally, we have funded Education Freedom Scholarships for up to 20,000 students. Half of those, 10,000 scholarships, are reserved for students below 300% of the federal poverty line. The number of scholarships available in future years will depend solely on future appropriations set aside for these scholarships. As many of you know, a rural health task force met for several months to discuss how do we improve access to rural health. Improving health in our rural areas is a major goal. This past year, that task force delivered a report containing strategies to improve rural access to health care. The FY25 budget includes an $81 million as an initial investment of a multi-year $200 million initiative. The largest portion of this initial investment is for rural health resiliency grants. These grants will be used for capital investments and practice transformation grants to improve access to healthcare services in rural areas. 3 items, the pathways, apprenticeship, and training items, are all healthcare workforce initiatives to provide more healthcare workers in rural areas. As we all know, sometimes finding the skilled workers in these rural areas is more difficult than any other problem. So those will help with that. The specialty care and telemedicine initiatives will provide access to specialty and primary care physicians. And finally, a center of excellence will be established to provide rural hospitals and other providers with access to expertise and assistance that may not be available to them in a more rural part of the state. In addition to the rural health initiatives, we also have other health initiatives that proposed in this budget as well. TennCare will receive $273 million to continue improving services to its clients and providers. Within that TennCare budget is the fulfillment of a $17 million commitment to nursing home stability that will ensure the continuity of care for our elderly population. The dental services pilot is year 3 of a 5-year pilot to improve dental education and make dental services more accessible to more Tennesseans. Health provider rate increases will total nearly $33 million as we acknowledge the impact of healthcare inflation on these key providers. Finally, we propose funding to increase another funding increase for our direct service providers. These are men and women who work directly with the elderly, people with disabilities, and others to ensure that they get the kind of one-on-one personal care that they often need. This is the 4th consecutive increase in this pay rate since FY21. So far, given this increase, this group of individuals will have received a 54% pay increase over the past 4 years. In addition to physical health, we also want to look at mental health, behavioral health. The mental health of Tennesseans has never been more important than it is today. So we propose a significant investment in Tennessee's mental health safety net of over $100 million over the next 5 years. This slide shows some of the funding for the first year of that $100 million program. Last year, we added school-based behavioral health liaisons for schools across the state. This year, we are funding an additional $8 million to hire 114 new liaisons to work in our schools and with our students across Tennessee. $15 million will fund infrastructure improvements and workforce support to behavioral health hospitals to improve access for complex medical inpatient care. We also fulfill the second year of a Children's Hospital Infrastructure Grant to help these hospitals establish specialized facilities to more effectively deal with children with behavioral health concerns. These children often come into the ERs, and many of those hospitals do not have the facilities to deal with them, and this will help them to develop those facilities. There are also several other aspects of this initiative that will help extend services focused on treating Tennessee children and adults with mental health needs, as well as improving training among behavioral health professionals. Again, we will be glad to discuss any of these that you may have questions about. Another initiative in this proposed budget is to increase law enforcement's capacity to care for the safety of our citizens. Prior to this budget, we have funded 200 new troopers in the past few years for the Tennessee Highway Patrol. This budget proposes funding an additional 60 positions to continue growing the force and its capabilities. These 60 positions will require about $11.5 million in recurring funding and $6 million in non-recurring for equipment and other startup costs for these positions. We have a beautiful and naturally diverse state. Our job is to take care of it. The outdoors has always been an important part of the Tennessee experience, and so we need to continue focusing on protecting our outdoor legacy now and for future generations. To that end, the Heritage Conservation Trust will hold $71 million earmarked for specific, unique, scenic properties as potential new state parks, state forests, and other areas where our citizens can enjoy the outdoors. Also, Tennessee's #1 industry is agriculture. Agriculture is even featured prominently on our state seal. However, Tennessee's farmland is in a crisis. We are losing our farmland at the 3rd fastest rate of any state in the U.S. Our farmland is a valuable asset to Tennessee and to many families across our state. This $25 million will help the Department of Agriculture work with farmers to identify farmland that can be voluntarily put into a conservation easement and saved for future generations. We've talked a lot about land and how valuable it is, and it is. However, Tennessee is blessed by amazing waterways and rivers also. Many of our at-risk and distressed counties have identified waterway access as a key to an improved economic future. The Blue Ways Trail Development Initiative will build access points and infrastructure to help our rural counties and to create more access to more rivers for more Tennesseans. We also have an opportunity to work with a Tennessee treasure and a sport fishing icon, Bill Dance. Fishing is one of the most popular sports in the country, and Tennessean Bill Dance is a legend in that sport. The Bill Dance Signature Lakes is a joint effort with Bill Dance, the Department of Tourism, TDEC, TWRA, Agriculture, and others to develop a system of lakes with superior fishing venues. With the Bill Dance Signature Lakes, Tennessee will be a fishing destination for people from around the country and around the world to fish our Tennessee waters. When I was 13, I was driving from Atlanta to Arkansas, and I drove through Tennessee, and I remember my family that I thought Tennessee had the most beautiful interstates I'd ever seen. And we do have some beautiful places that our interstates pass through, but our interstates themselves could be a little nicer, a little prettier, and be a little bit more, show a little bit more of the natural beauty of our state. So we are proposing a $5 million investment to be used to beautify our highways and better represent the natural splendor of Tennessee. Access 2030 is an effort to make Tennessee state parks and outdoors the most accessible in the country. Some uses for this funding include accessible boat ramps, all-terrain wheelchairs, and adult changing tables. The outdoors are a big part of our Tennessee heritage, and we need to ensure that all Tennesseans have access to the natural wonders of this amazing state. The last significant item is $59 million for capital projects. These are mostly in our state parks, but not exclusively. These projects will provide basic infrastructure like visitor centers, bathrooms, and other facilities needed for people who visit our new and planned state parks. As I mentioned earlier, Tennessee has a history of both investing and saving for the future. We always put a little bit back for a rainy day. This is why this budget adds to the rainy day fund, even though that fund is already over its statutory goal. That is also why we propose to continue this practice of using recurring revenue for non-recurring expenses. Earlier, I presented a slide very similar to the one that is on the screen here. It showed how the General Assembly and the administration has put money aside during the high growth years to see us through the low growth years. It was good practice then, and it's good practice now. This budget continues this tradition by using $785 million of the recurring revenue as non-recurring expenses. These dollars will be available next year in FY26 to give the state a built-in cushion as a reserve against future unknowns. We will be ready for whatever FY26 brings. Though this budget is more challenging and in many ways less exciting than previous budgets, we have approached it in a very similar manner. This budget funds ongoing commitments and realistic growth. This budget remains faithful to key priorities such as education, healthcare, and safety. This budget is structurally balanced. We are spending within our means. This budget addresses significant funding challenges without kicking the can down the road. This budget is forward-looking, establishing a strong base and strong reserves for the next year, FY26. We are proud to present this budget in the spirit of Tennessee conservatism that has served the state so well over the years. Thank you all and your predecessors for all that you have done to put this state in a good position to be able to weather slow growth years when they come about and be able to thrive in the slow growth years as well as in the high growth years. Thank you very much for your attention. We look forward to answering whatever questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate you going through this. I know at this point in time, you probably are reciting this in your sleep as you have presented this multiple times by now, but we do appreciate the opportunity to hear it directly from you and for us to have some questions. I do have a number of people on our list, beginning with Chairman Whitson.
Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood, and good seeing you, Commissioner, and your team. Appreciate all y'all do in this hectic part of the year, and it is your dedication and y'all's expertise is recognized. My question has to do with school safety grants. I know this past year we set up a grant program that schools can apply for, and my question is, does this budget provide additional school safety grants LEAs can apply for this year?
I don't think so. I don't believe so. Thank you. Yes, my team is telling me, no, there is no new money additional, but it was recurring. So it will be back in the base budget.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr.
And for the record, if you could just remind us, Mr. Thurman, of the amount, that base amount.
You know. Madam Chair, let us get back to you on that,
All right.
if you don't mind. Thank you.
That's fine. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo that. Thank you all for all you're doing for this great state and for the General Assembly. So, with words mattering, and I don't mean to, this isn't to catch you or anything, it's really just to get some information. You would use the word that the $2 billion rainy day fund was a good amount. What does great look like?
It's a good question, and we do need to get to great. We actually are putting money, even though this is a low growth year, we are putting money into the rainy day fund to grow it even further. So we are growing it further, and we have no plans to take anything out of the rainy day fund or any other specific reserve to fund our operations of what we're doing. So it's a good question. I think great is in the eye of the beholder, but there's no doubt that continuing to grow the rainy day fund is a good conservative practice.
I think I'm good.
I'm sorry, Representative McKenzie, go ahead.
Thank you. Kind of switching gears a little bit. As you talked about the voucher program and the $141 million that we're putting in this year, 24-25. Two questions. Then what? Where does 25-26 come from? Or is this just a one-year program? And then you had talked about half of the participants are funded at are chosen from the 300% of poverty level. Where are the other half of the potential participants coming from?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. As far as the next year, your first question, what happens next year? The funding amount is for this year, and it is a recurring number, so it will be available next year at this level. Any growth in this program will be subject to the appropriations that are made for this program. So any growth will come from appropriation from the General Assembly in the future years. Okay, that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's what we're looking at there. And then the bill outlines 10,000 scholarships for students that are under 300% of the poverty level. And so that is the carve out to make sure that we have 10,000 students, assuming they apply, that are under that that number.
Representative McKenzie.
Yeah, just to finish that up. So how much more is left for those of us that are above or well above that 300% of poverty level?
That's about the other 10,000. There's 20,000 total scholarships. So there's 10,000 below, and then the other 10,000.
All right, Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Bryson, your team, again, I echo the thanks for you being here and the hard work that goes into this. I want to remind folks that back on slides number 6 and 8, the non-recurring expenses that we're funding with recurring revenues, the exact opposite was going on when I got here 22 years ago. So it's quite refreshing to be able to have those conversations that we're having and the opportunity we have to make these investments. I do want to go to those two slides, and I want to make sure I got this clear. We're talking about $2.6 billion replacing the $718 million shortfall. Can you, if I'm talking the right language here, do we have a schedule for how those non-recurring expenses were replaced or are being replaced as we close this budget out, or am I understanding that correctly? I'll restate it again. Let's go back to the $2.6 billion of non-recurring expenses. Looks like we're replacing the $718 million shortfall. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, it's accurate to say that we have $2.6 billion of recurring expenses from the previous year that is rolling over into this year. It's also accurate to say that we have a shortfall in this FY24, the year we're in today, of $718 million. And so that you could say that $2.6 million is helping to make up that shortfall. That's correct.
And I believe, Commissioner, you said $2.6 billion expenses. I believe you meant revenues because,
I'm sorry, I did mean.
yes,
Thank you.
you're going to make us all have heart failure up here. Chairman Hawk.
And thank you. And just the second part, and I may have got it out too quickly, is there a schedule for what expenses we may not be investing in now? Or is that going to be done through reversions, or what's the vision of that?
So I was asking because I thought we had a slide in here that kind of, I think, addressed your question, and it's not here. As far as a schedule goes, we don't really have that, but we can provide you with kind of where this money has more or less gone this year, because there's some big things like the $718 million there, and the $400 million that went to that we're putting in for the loss in revenue for the tax. We can get you some of those informations if that would be helpful. Okay, we may be able to have you in just a moment.
Okay.
One follow-up.
Certainly, Chairman Hawk.
And forgive me, to my members as well. Back to slide 15, we're talking about the TennCare, the other highlights, and I think that's tremendous. $273.5 million for TennCare. Are those being achieved through a shared savings that we've talked about? I think I heard the governor talk about that, or is this an expansion in the mental health services, or can we define that a little more clearly? And I'm done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
On which slide? The 273. Yeah, the 273 is coming out of the general fund, but we are using shared services to help us pay for some of the rural health, as well as behavioral health initiatives that we talked about. Yeah. And if I may just,
Certainly, Commissioner.
I think this is what Director Thurman just put up on the screen, I think is what you are asking about. And it's basically, we take the $2.6 billion and we have an adjustment of the tax base because we had to go from 2.25% growth to 0% growth. So we had to fill in that hole, right? 718, we had the franchise tax legislation of 410. We have cost increases, some of that I just outlined in the budget, of about $800 million. We had salary and benefits for state employees, $158 million. Then we had just kind of a fruit basket of other things, so to speak, of about 282. And so when you net all that out, it comes out to about 700. Those are our recurring expenses. And then we have about 785 million that we spend on non-recurring expenses. And that's, if you remember at the end of my presentation, I said we're going to put about 785 of recurring dollars into non-recurring expenses that will show up next year. And that's where that 785 comes from. Is this what you were asking about? Great, thank you. I'm sorry, this was a revision to the presentation I wanted to show you all, and we got the wrong presentation up.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Commissioner, thank you. I'm going to go back to slide 15 as well. And there's a provider rate increases of 32,806,400. Can you give me a breakdown of who receives those, what providers?
Yes, thank you. It's several different groups, and I think I have a sheet here with those on it. So there are, I'll just read what I have.
That'd be great. Thank you.
That'd be great. So mental health rate increase includes both substance abuse and mental health services. Okay. For DCS, funding targeted provider rate increases. I don't have much more detail, but I can get you more on that. And then TennCare for DCS, custody services provider rate increases. So those are the ones that I have on my sheet that those were anticipated for.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you for that. One more question. And then on page 18, the highway beautification, the $5 million. We've got a pretty long state and a lot of highways. I mean, what do we think we're going to get for $5 million?
Yeah, actually, yesterday we had a conversation with Commissioner TDOT about that, and they're still working on what that looks like and what that will be. So I don't really have a really good answer. I just know it is something that we had a lot of interest in seeing if we could begin a program that would beautify, and this was a start to do that.
Good luck with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
While we were on page 15, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for including the rate increase for the direct support professional. Is something, the DSP increases are something that every committee member and most of our colleagues in the legislature have been very committed to. We've been working on this for a long time, and I thank you for putting it in proactively rather than making us fight for it. We do appreciate that so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I looked into this, I was very proud of this one particularly, even though it's not as much money as we would like to put into it. 4 or 5 years ago, they were making $10 an hour, and it's just not enough it's not enough. And so we're very proud to do that. Thank you for recognizing that.
Well, again, we're not where we want to be, and I think my goal, and I would hope that it would be shared by the members of the committee at some point when we get them to a reasonable rate. I would like these employees' salary increases to be tied to state employee salary increases because they are doing the work of the state, but we don't want to do that until we have a reasonable base to work from. But we're getting there, and I appreciate the efforts that have been made to help us get there. So thank you for that. Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and no one is a bigger advocate in this body than you are for DSP increases, and so she likes to give us credit for it, but she's the one advocating probably the most for anybody, and so we're thankful for that. But I did have a question about the conservation initiatives, about the farmland. Can you tell me how the mechanism of that works? I mean, are we actually buying the land? Are we leasing the land? Are we doing an overlay for the land and then leasing it back to the farmer for them to utilize that property for row crops or whatever? Could you help me a little bit with that?
Thank you, Representative. I can help you very little with that. Actually, I believe what we're doing is we are helping them to purchase the easement on it because, as you know, that affects the value of the land. And so I believe that's what we're doing, but the mechanics of the process, I don't really understand, but we can get that from the Department of Agriculture.
Just as a follow-up to that, I'm just trying to figure out, if what we're spending the money on, is there a better way to do it? Are there any other states that do this that we were able to model that from? It's a good idea in theory, I think. I just don't know the mechanics of how it would work and how we can assure the taxpayers that's a good investment in their dollar.
I believe there are several other states that are doing this program or very similar to this, if not exactly the same. How they are doing it and what the model looks like, I'm not sure.
Okay.
And Commissioner, follow up on that, and I could be wrong because there's a lot in this budget, but you mentioned the Department of Agriculture, which is where that would seem reasonable for it to lie, but I thought I saw that this was TDEC.
That's correct. It is. It actually, in the amendment, we're going to move it over to Ag. It was not meant to be in TDEC.
Okay, thank you. Representative Parkinson.
Oh, I wasn't finished.
Oh, I'm
Thank
sorry. I am so sorry. I interrupted Representative Chairman Williams,
No.
and
Thank you.
Representative Parkinson, if you would just take a deep breath and step back, we'll get to you. Chairman Williams.
Thank you about that. I want to follow up on two particular points, not necessarily in the documents, but in miscellaneous appropriations. I noticed that there was a base increase of about $309 million. Just to kind of get a better understanding of what we're doing, when we see a base increase in that amount, is that generally for payroll, benefits, those kinds of things as it relates to just the regular growth of government? It's just a little bit confusing sometimes when we see it on that page because it says miscellaneous appropriation. There's not something else out there that we're funding other than the typical growth of government. Is that correct?
Well, so everything for miscellaneous is itemized. I forget what page number, but yeah. But I will say most of what's there, you're right, are the global adjustments for salary and benefits and insurance. And we have a amount to work with, but we won't actually allocate that until the budget is enacted and as we set up agencies work program. And the main reason I guess the history of why we do that is because salary policy used to be in agencies' budgets.
Mhm.
And when it was proposed, it would be changed and it would make it really hard to adjust every agency's budget. So we wanted to wait to see what the pool was, and then we would push it out once versus multiple changes. So it was just an easier way to administer that big adjustment.
Okay, thank you. One more question. I just had to follow up on Chairman Hawk's question previously on the monies that we have that were retained as recurring revenue, the reduction of those revenues, the difference between slide 6 and slide 19. What we find ourselves in a way is that because we were able to fund things that were non-recurring with reoccurring dollars, what we're saying is the pot of reoccurring dollars has now been reduced by $1.7 billion. So when we come in here next year and you're sitting in front of us, that $2.6 billion being reduced by the $1.9 billion, that tranche of money that we've been reserving, we've consumed, 60% of it just in one budget year alone. Is that correct?
It would have been used on recurring dollars, on recurring programs, recurring uses, and so it would be in the base budget instead of in improvements in the budget. But what we would have, that's why we have the $785 million here, because that would be money that would be available from this budget.
Thank you.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and thank you all for your hard work. And I can imagine the lift in doing this every year. Right. I understand. Great team. What have we allocated in the budget for the Achievement School District?
I mean, we'll find you the page number. Here in a
Sure.
second.
Thank you.
He's telling me it's on page B108, it's 109 million.
B108, 109 million. Can you tell me what was last year's allocation for that?
The same amount.
Same amount. So 109 million. Is that correct? Okay, 109 million. And can you also tell me what we've allocated for the state charter authorizer or charter commission who also holds schools in their portfolio also?
Alex Schuman with the Budget Office. Charter School Commission recommending about 114 million for 2025. The 24 budget is 87.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if you can answer this or not, but the Achievement School District has about 15 schools, I think, or so, maybe 16 in their portfolio. And the Charter Commission has how many schools in their portfolio?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I think it's less. I think it might be about half the amount. But the Charter Commission's budget is almost parallel to that of the Achievement School District that has twice the amount of schools in its portfolio. I'm just trying to wrap my hands around, how that's possible, which both of them are state-run school districts.
Representative Parkinson, that question might best be asked when we have the Department of Ed in front of us.
Sure, Madam Chair Lady, thank you for that. I just want to get those numbers on the record so we can, take a look at them when we need to take a look at them. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
And I had a quick follow-up to Chairman Williams' question earlier about salaries. And last year in the budget, we had a significant amount of money for we did market rate studies in almost every department, if not everyone. And we put to use the technical term, a boatload of money into the budget to fund that. This year's salary budgets, I'm assuming those are just for the normal pool kind of increases. We do not have any additional market rate. Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just a couple of topics here. And one, look, there have been predecessors of yours and many folks that have worked in your fine department that have tried to fight the chairman on rate increases for our hardworking employees out there, and they have lost every year. So I am glad that you're ahead of the game and made sure to go ahead and put those rate increases in. And I think the chairman telegraphed that it would be nice if we now go a little further and match them up with the other state employees. So I'll let that be a conversation for another time, but I've watched other folks lose that battle. So I'm glad you are starting out on the right foot. Education. How much new money did we put into public education last year? Do one of y'all have that easily at your fingertips? It's in our budget book here, but I just want to hear it out loud in the committee. I'll give you a hint on the next question. I'm going to ask you how much we're investing this year.
You don't know from last year? Well, I can tell you, yeah, I've got it actually. No. So this year it's $6.775 billion for it in TISA. Last year it was $6.514 billion for TISA.
And what we're looking at on that is, I mean, over a $200 million increase in traditional K through 12 public school funding, correct?
261, I believe, is going into TISA this year.
And I believe last year's was similar to that. The increase that we put in last year, if you go back 3 years, it was close to that.
If you look at this chart, what you'll see is that we had a major increase in TISA funding for this year in FY24 of what is that, over $1 billion. And over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a $2 billion increase in TISA funding.
And the reason I highlight that is because we have a lot of conversations about education funding. And do we know if throughout the state that teachers are actually receiving raises because of this monumental investment of taxpayer funds in K through 12 education? Do we know if that's occurring?
No. Yeah, it's occurring. And I will tell you that as related to that, we know that we are on track to raise the minimum teacher salary up to $50,000. This year, we're raising it up to $44,500, I believe, starting teacher salary. And we're on schedule to get that raised to $50,000 by FY27.
And if you don't know the answer to the question, just get it back to me later. But I think most of us would like to know how much is that going to take in recurring funding to get all of our teachers starting salary up to $50,000 starting pay? So when we're looking at different options on whether to do that this year or over the next 3 years, I know most of us would like to do that as soon as possible. And full disclosure, my little brother is a 7th grade math teacher. He does a great job. He's a young married man with a 1-year-old child, and they're probably the brokest they're ever going to be for those of us that have lived that time frame in life. I mean, it's just there's a lot of expenses, especially when you're young, married, and have a family. There's a lot of teachers throughout this state that fit that exact mold. So I hope we're getting that up as fast as humanly possible. And quite frankly, he's in a county where we're blessed that we've raised our pay for our teachers up more rapidly than others. So over $2 billion investment in that. I'm glad to hear that it's going to teachers, but I would like to know what we can do to accelerate that and how much it would cost to get it up above 50,000 even quicker than that. Shifting to TennCare. I had a gentleman several years ago ask me, he said, well, if y'all spend as much on education as you did on prisons, then this state would be in a lot better shape. And then I shared with him that we spent over $8 billion state and federal funds included on K through 12 education and only about $1 billion on prisons. Well, the TennCare budget is now over $15 billion, correct? What's the total TennCare budget?
So total appropriation for all of TennCare, including federal, is 15.5 billion. Five of that is state.
And of that, how much is the shared savings plan?
So last year we got 330 million.
And what was that used for last year? What programs did that fund?
So, and I'll just reference the handout that you have here. At the very last page details how that 330 was allocated. And really two things, strong families, Tennessee families coverage and diapers program. And that's outlined to cover that for the next 8 years.
And how much do we anticipate in the shared savings plan this year?
A little over 300.
So another 300. And what do we anticipate that's going to be utilized for?
So I'm not going to go through the entire list, but it's a lot of items here on this last page. But it's for rural health and behavioral health, different numerous items there.
And the TennCare reserve at this juncture, when you take the $500 million that we set aside for recertification, the other $500 million that's there, and some other reserves, what is their total reserve funding at this point? Again, including the $500 million that we set aside for recertification.
1.5 billion.
1.5 billion. Okay. And then last topic I have, and Madam Chairman, thank you for your patience. I'm just trying to hit some of the larger budget items here. For our airport infrastructure, that's an issue we've all worked on for several years. I noticed in the budget that it mentioned in there, I think it was $24 million for airports, but I know there are some additional funds that we're pulling from for both the Big Five, for the other airports. What's our total investment in airport infrastructure this year, including fuel tax? I mean, kind of the whole thing. What are we going to be doing to assist our airports and infrastructure this year?
Thank you. While they're looking up the detail, I'll tell you that on the general aviation airports, our goal is several years ago, there was a study done on what's needed to keep them maintained. And that was something between 40 and $50 million, I believe. And so our goal is to keep that fund at $50 million a year. And so I'll let Director Thurman walk through this. He has the details. And then the other $23 million is going toward our 5 major carrier airports. And Director Thurman.
So working with DOT, the 24 million in appropriation will add to what's already in their base with federal dollars. For general aviation, about 50 million. And then for commercial, they'll get the portion of the fuel tax. Looks like 90 million federal and about 95 state dollars that go with that. On top of that, it's about 180 total.
In the budget book that you've been kind enough to provide us, do you know what page that aviation funding's on, or is it on several?
So I don't know if we have a separate schedule on that, but I can get that to you.
If you don't mind, that's just one I like to keep up with and one I get a lot of questions about. So thank you all so much for your hard work. You've done a wonderful job of putting together a good proposed budget. I'm sure we will enjoy as a committee going through the next few months of really, just diving into this. But there's a lot of really good investments. And again, the amount of money, the billions of dollars that we have invested in K through 12 education in this state are pretty phenomenal. It's surprising to me that doesn't get more attention out there in the public because Republicans and Democrats alike, especially on this committee, know how hard it is to get billions of dollars in recurring funding out of a budget. And it's happened over and over and over in this state. So to our teachers out there, we value you, we appreciate you, and thank you for your hard work. Thank you, gentlemen.
Representative Love, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. Had a question about the chart, page 19, preparing for the future. I know we listed out the recurring revenue, non-recurring expenses, fiscal year 23 and 24. Those amounts there. I had a question about how much these amounts were impacted and or influenced by CARES Act or ARPA funding.
Actually, these are recurring dollars, aren't they? So they would not have been influenced generally, I believe I'm right, by the federal funds because these are recurring dollars. So these would come out of state tax revenues.
Representative Love.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. I was just wondering if we used any of those funds to pay for any things in our budgets or any other department needs that may have kept us from having to use those state recurring dollars for the normal expenses.
I think if this doesn't answer your question, please ask. Most of those federal funds that came in, we did a very good job, I believe, of making sure that the vast majority were spent on non-recurring items, a lot of capital, a lot of like water, wastewater, and other things that we need to do in this state. When those federal funds were used, they're primarily used for non-recurring items like capital, because we are very careful, and I think this General Assembly and this administration have been very careful not to use one-time money for ongoing expenses. So I think that's the answer to your question. We really did not build that into our recurring department budgets.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank y'all for being here as always. And I'm just wanting to make sure I understand this, get on record. The ESA money will not affect K through 12 or vice versa. Would I be safe to say that?
That's correct.
So in
Funding.
the scholarship funds, if that scholarship is given, it doesn't take anything away from the K through 12 money. I'm asking the question a different way.
Well, that's right. That's why we put it into this budget from the general fund. So if there's a scholarship given, it comes out of this budget item that we are now funding. It's $141 million that is funded for those scholarships, and that child gets a scholarship out of this fund.
Mhm.
And it does not come out of the TISA money or the money that we send to the local school districts.
Which we've heard from time to time, that rhetoric. Just vice versa, if that child get the scholarship, which is not a whole lot when you think about it compared to what education costs, and if he or she has to return back into the public school system, how does that affect the K through 12 money?
If they get the scholarship and go back to the
And have
public
to,
school
yes,
system.
sir, and have to go back for whatever reason.
Well, the scholarships are annual scholarships. They're one-year scholarships. So if they did not reapply for the scholarship, then they would go back to the public school and they wouldn't get a scholarship for that. Right?
Then the K through 12 money would be increased again for that child being back in the public school system.
Correct.
I assume. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Leader
you, Madam.
Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner team. Mr. Commissioner, on the schedule, page 4, under section 6, in closing our 2023 budget, general fund of unappropriated surplus, you following with me? Of 1.5 billion available for this year's development. The Department of Revenue estimated about 333 million that we would have under collected. So it's been a lot of talk about under collection, but we also know that, with some of the reversions that we got and some of the over collection in our agencies, it produced about $1.8 billion, which left us this 1.5 that we see here. It looks like the largest component of that surplus is from agency reversions. Can you tell me what's the major component of some of this high conversions that we're seeing here in that line item there?
I'll attempt to do that at this point, and so then we can get you some
Okay.
additional information.
Yes, sir.
We've had several items within that. This is an extraordinary amount. Usually it's in the 250 range, something like that. So this is an extraordinary amount that has come in this past year from agency reversions.
Mhm.
There are several different departments, and I don't have a list of those right now where they came from, but we can get you that contribute to that. One of many causes, frankly, was that you saw how much we put into, we had huge budget growth last year. A lot of those programs or pilots or things that we started don't start right off. We fund them for 12 months, but we don't actually, they're not actually they might operate for 8, 9, 10 months, and it's because there's ramp up costs. So some of that gets reverted back. So sometimes there's some of that. There's a lot of other areas in which we can, a lot of other departments, some departments had larger reversions than others. If it's all right with you, what I'd like to do is just give you a list of those.
Leader Camper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Also, Madam Chair, on
Go ahead.
page B86 of the budget document, with respect to TISA, it looks like the formula not only includes the formula for the students, but are the salaries also included in that number?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you have any idea, maybe we can talk about it later, what that amounts to within this formula for salaries? We always hear from the teachers all the time. It never gets to us.
Yeah, the
And
total
so,
amount,
yeah.
the total salary increases right up to $125 million.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Madam Chair, just,
Leader
and
Camper?
these are short, so I appreciate it. If you go to A60 in the budget document, I think I talked about this last year with respect to the state treasurer, where we can see that the actual revenue was 771. If you look in 2022, 23, then we estimated, and then now we're estimating only 3.7. That's a big drop off to me. And I'm wondering, are we not really taking into consideration the interest in we have a great treasurer, he's doing great things. And so I would like to, I'm trying to understand the difference in these amounts here and how did we get all the way down to 3.7?
I'm going to attempt to answer this. The director answered this last time it came up and did it very, very well. And I've got on my training wheels and
All
I'm going to
right.
try to answer this. And if he needs to add to it, he will. Several years ago, we would get maybe $2 million in this interest expense from the treasurer because it's made up of two things, really. It's the balance, the cash you have in the bank, as well as the interest rates that you get. If, as you all know, as I showed you, we've got billions in the bank because of the capital projects and other things that we funded that haven't been, all the cash hasn't flowed through yet. We're working hard for that to flow through, but right now we're still holding on to it. So there's a lot of money in the bank right now that it may be obligated, but it's there.
But it's there.
And then we also, interest rates have been high. So we have seen a good bit of interest come in, as you noted here. We consider this to be one-time money, non-recurring, because we don't know from one year to the next how much money we're going to have in the bank or what interest rates are going to be. Because as I said, a couple of years ago, they were down at just $1 or $2 million, very, very, very small, and we don't know what it's going to be going forward. This is money that we use when we find out how much it is, and we don't try to project it out because that gets us into some serious problems because we can't predict the future in some of those areas.
Leader Camper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that answer. It just seems like we could look differently at those estimates. But I appreciate your point. I understand the conservative nature of what you're doing. I get it. And lastly, Madam Chair, one more question. So on the Texas border deployment, the administration, I'm curious, should we expect a supplemental appropriation for the extraordinary duty that's going to be going on down there, or how should where are the funds coming from in order for us to accomplish that mission?
So
Is that-
overview has $11 million balance, and in the amendment, we'll basically use that funding to address that in the supplemental.
Okay, could you say that?
The
close to the mic?
overview that the budget that we're presenting to you today has $11 million balance. and
Okay.
When we bring you the amendment later, we'll address it from that balance.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chairman Keesling.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, let's go to page 18, just a quickie here, line item, that $3 million line item, assess 2030. Could you just highlight for me, what's that funding?
Yeah, Access 2030 is about helping all Tennesseans to be able to access the outdoors, particularly in our state parks. This is actually a state park program.
State park. Okay.
Right. It's been used for all-terrain wheelchairs. It's been used for adult changing tables. It's been used for ramps for to help people get into buildings and other places. Also to develop trails that are more accessible than some of the hard trails that go up and down the mountains, so that people can actually get out into our outdoors and
Got it.
enjoy our outdoors.
That's fine. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I have a couple of questions about the rainy day fund. You know, again, we're putting 20 million in with this budget. That's going to put us almost at 2.1. So two questions. One, do we have a goal or a strategy that we're trying to get to? And then secondly, what revenues are being produced off of those funds?
Where do they go? Okay. Okay, thank you for that. So the first goal, we do have a goal, and the goal is 8%. So we're well over our goal. We don't have another goal. So that is something that we could develop if we felt like it was important to do so. It kind of gets, I think, to Representative McKenzie's question about what is great, right? And so we could develop an additional goal if we wanted to. The interest on those funds go into what we were talking about a few minutes ago, go into interest earnings overall.
Representative Barrett.
And what is that amount anticipated with the current budget?
So for current year, 445. And then as Leader Camper mentioned, it's 3.7 for 25. And just to kind of put that in perspective, actual year, it was $771 million, which is the highest it's ever been since I've been doing this. Year before that was 31. Year before that it was 4. So it's just very volatile. So I think we as he said, we're very cautious to kind of project that forward. But I think we would continue to watch it, and we'll probably adjust it in the amendment as we have more experience to understand what we have in hand.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Want to go to page 15, a smaller request, and then to page, I guess, 9, a larger request. Provider rate increases. I'd like to, say to our chair lady, she has passionately been advocating for increase for years, as well as the rest of us. And as Representative Williams mentioned how passionate she's been about this issue, as well as Leader Lambert. And as I was sitting talking to them or listening to what they were saying about that, sort of had to re-educate myself on exactly how this budget process really works. And at the end of the day, the legislature votes for the budget, not the governor. He proposes and, pretty much gets what he wants out of it. But then I say, wait a minute. Even Lambert said, we've been fighting for this, but we keep getting pushbacks. So I'm assuming he was speaking of just not this administration, but maybe the last administration. I'm not sure. But Madam Chair Lady, I would say that since you've been passionate about this, we've been in support of it. I think at any point in time you decide you want to change those numbers, I think you can do it, and you would get a great majority of support on this in this body.
I'm so glad to know you think I have that much power, Representative Miller. I'll speak to the governor about that.
Okay, let's move on to 9. Commissioner, I was reading an article and it said that because of this, I guess, issue of supplemental budget impact of $1 billion and a recurring cost of 410 million, that the Attorney General, along with experts in his office, as well as the Commissioner of Revenue, I guess decided to do research or come up with this idea concept. Were you sitting at the table when the decision was made to present this to the governor?
There were lots of meetings around this, and I was in the vast majority of them.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to know that because again, it talked about the experts in the Attorney General's office as well as Commissioner, but it didn't mention specifically Commissioner FNA. But you were there, so I just wanted to know that. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you looking out for me. Thank you.
And Commissioner, while we're talking about that, if you could help me and maybe some others on the committee understand, when we talk about this franchise issue, we talk about a 3-year look back because statutorily that's what businesses can apply for. But then you mentioned a 4-year cost. So I'm assuming that's the cost for the current year and the 410 and then the 1.2 is the 3-year look back. But could you clarify that?
The look back period is a little bit complicated. Commissioner Geragano is in the audience. Would it be appropriate for him to answer that question?
Commissioner Garagano, you don't have to sit back down. Please come on up.
Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood. David Geragano, Commissioner of Revenue. So the statute of limitations period that's in the code, which has been in the code, is sort of, it's sometimes referred to as 3 years, but it's not quite that simple. It's, you can request a refund within 3 years of December 31st of the year in which you file the return and pay the tax. So it's really up to 4 years. It just depends on at what point in the year you pay. So the look back period would be up to 4 years. So that's where the commissioner came to the 4-year.
And where did the preponderance of our payees pay? What do they pay at the end of the year? Is it spread out across the year? How does that work?
Yes, ma'am. The large majority are calendar year taxpayers that then file their due date would be in April, or their extended due date would be in November. So, calendar year 2020 taxpayers would have filed their return in 2021 and therefore would have until December 31st of 2024 to file a refund claim.
All right. Thank you. And Chairman Hawk, you may have a question for the commissioner while he's here with us. Oh, yeah. Okay. Representative Miller.
Madam Chair, later. Just a question. You may have an answer to this, but there was a number of 80 different businesses that would benefit from the $1 billion. Is that somewhat correct? Or
Representative Miller, I know there's a lot of possibility for that to be. Let me just back up. That's really not correct. 80 is the number, approximate number of companies that have currently filed refund claims that brought this issue to our attention. But they are not unique. They're really not any different than all the other population of taxpayers. So the issue really involves a significant portion of the franchise tax and F&E taxpayers out there. So the total number of potential refund claimants is more like 100,000. It's not anything to do with those 80.
Representative Miller.
Last question on this is that you may not have an answer, but do you know of any of these businesses that have been paying franchise taxes that, in other words, they've gone out of business because this tax has been just a tremendous harassment on their operation? Do you know of any businesses that are going under?
No, I mean, I certainly don't know the individual circumstances of any particular businesses. I certainly couldn't say that, but I think it's worth saying that's not really the test that we're dealing with.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. I think Chairman Hawk, you had a question for Commissioner Bryson?
I do, back to F&A, and I don't think this would involve revenue. A blast from the past here. I'm looking on one of the schedules that was given to us, and we talk about the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement. How many more years can we expect dollars to come into the state for that? And possibly this will beget some conversation with the Attorney General's office and other offices as we're seeing some of these legal settlements that come and will eventually go. Just this one in particular, how much longer can we expect revenues on that?
Alex Schuman with budget. I believe that's in perpetuity, that one.
All right, are there other questions? Seeing none, Commissioner, thank you for, once again, I believe for maybe the second time today, making this presentation and being willing to answer our questions. I would echo what has been said by a number of people here. We appreciate the hard work done by your staff. I mean, this is a $56 billion budget. That's a lot of money, a lot of departments, a lot of Tennessee citizens that are impacted by it. And we appreciate the effort that goes into putting it together so that we can, as Representative Miller had said, the legislature will have the final say, but you all are given the very difficult task of providing the base from which we start to work. So thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you for your willingness to respond to questions throughout this process, you and your staff. And I would recommend to any other members of the committee, I'll let you know that the staff is more than willing. We'll be happy to facilitate that. If you have questions that come to mind after we leave here today that you'd like answers from, I know that both Commissioner Garagano and Mr. Bryson would be happy to work with you either individually or small groups, whatever, to answer whatever questions that you might have. But again, we thank you for being here today. We are back in session, and without objection, we are adjourned. Oh, and we will begin budget hearings Monday morning at 9. We have tomorrow morning at 8. Put on your bright and happy face. And Monday morning, we will start Monday morning at 9. So 8 in the morning, not 8 p.m., Representative Shaw. Yes, 8 in the morning. We will be back here for budget hearings. And if you all will come in and we will get this work done, then we'll complete our work in an efficient and reasonable amount of time. So that is our goal. I thank you in advance for your participation. We are adjourned.